Hello and welcome to the LCHR show. I am Francisca with the Lincoln Commission on Human Rights as the Outreach Coordinator. And today we have a great show where we will learn a lot more about our Community Action Program here in the city of Lincoln. So as a guest, I have Roger Dorr. Excuse me, Roger. I always want to call you Dare, but it's not, it's Dorr, right?
Quite all right, common mistake. Thank you, Francisca. I'm happy to be here. So yes, I'm Roger Dorr, and I'm with Community Action Partnership here in Lincoln. 210 O Street is our location. I am the Tenant Support Services Coordinator. So what does that mean? I basically help people understand their rights as a tenant and try to facilitate with information and resources, better communication between tenants and their housing providers.
Which is important because, as we all know, not everybody knows what their rights are. At least they think they do. But you know what I like about your office is that you have a wealth of information that tenants know, and you seem to sometimes facilitate things between tenants and landlords. Can you please talk a little bit more about what types of services you offer for tenants?
It's a lot of different things. Primarily, I receive a lot of phone calls and emails about people with, generally the question starts, hey, my landlord's doing this or something like that. What can I do? What are my options? And you know, I'm limited to just what the Landlord-Tenant Act and everything that's in there, which covers 95% of the calls that I get. So. So I just help them through that, through the information there, and hope they find a resolution.
Absolutely. And before we get into, because I would be interested in knowing like what types of calls, but before we go into that, talk a little bit more about specifics with your tenant services and what kind of information you usually give your tenants.
Okay. So yeah, it totally depends on what the question is. There's some really common themes that come up. Questions on security deposits, questions on how to get repairs made, things like that, and a lot of the things like that, like with getting repairs done, a lot of the things will come down to code enforcement, which is back to the city and the building and safety department.
Right.
But and a lot of times people will look at our website, and that's a great wealth of knowledge, which is available on the Community Action Partnership website, but also directly through tenantservices.org. So has the whole Landlord-Tenant Act in common, easy to understand language with examples and sample forms, things like that. So that is a great resource to start with.
So going back to the tenant form that you have on your website, just for the purpose of our audience, what would be like the first top three or the first three things that people should really keep in mind as a tenant?
I think the most important thing that I share with people is the second most important document next to your lease is the move-in, move-out checklist. Yep. And that's vital to later on in the lease when you want to get your deposit back. Absolutely. So making note of the condition of the apartment, if there's little damages, a hole in the wall or a burn in the carpet, you want to make sure that that's all well documented, because we're taking the assumption that landlords are going to be honest, but if it's 3 years later, they might not remember exactly the condition. So it helps both parties to get that documented, and not only the move-in, move-out checklist, but also taking photos, taking videos of any damages, and then I always suggest emailing to the housing provider right away. So then everybody has the condition of the apartment and those pictures right away. So there's less question later on in the lease.
Yeah, and that is important because I know usually when we talk to individuals who are having maybe some a situation or a case coming up with a landlord, it is hard to pinpoint what they're talking about when they don't have any evidence or at least something to refer to, right? And so thank you, I appreciate that. So for any of you who just heard Roger, it is on their website and you can certainly download that. If a landlord does not give you that move-in, move-out sheet, what should a tenant do to protect themselves?
Yeah, sometimes you see that happen. Mostly landlords are going to provide that with you, and whatever form it is, it should just show every room in the location that you're moving into, and a move-in condition, move-out condition.
Right.
So you would note anything in that move-in line that might be wrong. I suggest printing one out, and they're readily available online, and there's no specific set form that it needs to be. So,
right. So being proactive, in other
yes.
words, and not just expecting everything to be handed, even though it would be nice if the landlord did.
Yes, it would be very nice, and generally it is. But then sometimes the tenant forgets to get their copy of it or doesn't get sent a copy of it. I suggest if you sign a lease and you're not getting the copy right away electronically, or the move-in, move-out checklist, take a picture of it before you leave. So if you don't get that copy, at least you have that picture to fall back on.
Right. Yeah, that is very great information to have and to know about it. What are some of the common phone calls? Let's go into your phone calls. What are some of the common phone calls that you receive as the tenant services coordinator?
Yeah, so there's probably 15 to 20 that are the vast majority of that. And like I mentioned, the security deposits, questions about that, which a lot of that, it comes down to the fact that according to the Landlord-Tenant Act here in Nebraska, leases are contracts between two parties. And if there's a dispute at the end, hopefully they work it out, which is why I emphasize good communication throughout the lease for both parties. And if they can't work it out, come up to something to put into writing, then it's gonna, one of the other party takes the other to court to figure it out. But other than that, I also mentioned getting repairs done, which is a tough thing sometimes. And like I mentioned, there are city housing codes here in Lincoln, as well as every city has their own set of codes that need to be followed. And if they're not being followed, there should be an enforcement division in every city. In Lincoln, it's the Building and Safety Department. They do a great job of keeping things in check.
Right.
So I let people know that that's a resource they can use to find out if something is a code violation.
Absolutely.
And if it is, they can help them deal with it.
So then what would be your role? Would you be like a facilitator or a mediator between the landlord and the tenant?
The mediation I do is very limited, but mostly it's empowering them to be able to do what they need to do themselves, giving them the information, giving them the resources that will let them be proactive and get the work done.
So then what, because I know that with the diversity that we have in our community, obviously there's a lot of different languages, and language barriers is probably one of the biggest reasons why there's sometimes communication issues. What would you suggest for someone who English is not their primary language?
So I have that situation a lot. I do lots of presentations in the community with new Americans who are not as fluent in English. If they do have questions and they don't have somebody to interpret for them, they can either leave me a message on my direct line, or they can email me and what language they speak, and then I would generally call back with an interpreter to talk the situation over. Community Action also has an Arabic and a Spanish line on their main number, so that's also an option as well. That's
great. I know more and more it seems like a lot of our agencies probably need that multilingual, so people can call in and get the information. So it says here, I see one of your flyers here, and it says you provide short-term case management. What does that look like?
It's just helping them through an issue. Like sometimes, most of the time, it's just one call, maybe 10 minutes. Sometimes an hour or more we'll talk, and it's just getting them the information, resources to help them solve the problems. A lot of times they'll call back. and say, okay, I did what you suggested. This is what happened. I didn't expect that. What can we do now?
Okay.
So a lot of times there's follow-up, but it's mostly just troubleshooting.
Troubleshoot.
And many times it's something that isn't necessarily really in Landlord-Tenant Act. So I'm referring them on to somebody. Maybe they do need an attorney, and then it's a referral to legal aid to find more information and possibly representation.
Very good. Now, does the tenant services, do you have any role, or do you provide any type of assistance when it comes to eviction processes, or when someone is receiving an eviction notice?
As far as payment, that would be our emergency services department can do that. But I can help them and let them know what the process is going to be, what it's probably going to look like. And then I can let them know, hopefully the goal is to avoid that eviction.
Yes.
And avoid that court date. So that's not on their permanent record, so they won't be able to find a place again, very likely. But also letting them know that in Lancaster County, there's going to be the Tenant Assistance Project at the court, and to make sure they bring all their documentation if they think they have grounds where they can fight it on for legal issues. There will be somebody there to help them with that. And many people are relieved just to know that.
So aside from helping tenants, do you in general go out to the community and just do some presentations on how you can best assist tenants and landlords? Because I imagine you also work with landlords in case they might run into an issue with a tenant.
Yes. I work with both tenants and landlords. I get, getting more and more calls from landlords now, which many of them feel like they're afraid to call that this is just for tenants. Where I encourage them, as a housing provider, it's important that you know the rules and regulations as well. It's going to make things smoother for everybody. And yes, I do lots of presentations. As I mentioned, I do presentations, a couple every month to people who are new Americans coming into the country and don't know not only their rights and responsibilities, but don't know the whole process, how it works. It's probably many times very different from where they are from.
So would you say that you would encourage any landlord who might be watching this video, if they have any questions or if they think there are concerns that they might have with a tenant, or just in general, would they be able to reach out to you?
Oh, certainly. Like I said, I'm not an attorney, so I can't give them legal advice, which many times is what is needed. But I certainly can, tell them what the Landlord-Tenant Act says here in Nebraska, and what their responsibilities are and what their rights are as a property owner or housing manager. Yes. Presentation in the community. I enjoy doing presentation in the community. I'm out there many times a month doing those. So.
Very good. Aside from the Tenant Act that you help people understand whether they're landlords or tenants, are there other services that you provide through your office?
Community Action in general has over 15 programs that we have. Most of them have very specific entry requirements, like anywhere in town. There's other ones that, like mine, that the only requirement is it's regarding something tenant landlord wise in Nebraska.
Right.
But yeah, we have many programs from the Gathering Place, which also has a free meal every night that you can get. No requirements, no questions.
Absolutely. So in general, what if you were to give advice to the community as a whole, because this will go out to our entire community, what would it be when it comes to tenant issues? I know, some people get hung up on, nobody's listening to me, they're not taking care of my property. What kind of advice could you give them? And obviously, I know you said you're not an attorney, but knowing what you know with all the cases that you have, if you had something to say to them, what would that be? What would make a difference in the communication that they should have with each other?
So I would say in general, You're in Nebraska. Your tenant rights are not as much as they would be in other places. So some people travel here from other places and realize that it's not as much. But the ones you do have are important to know. So know what your rights are. Feel free to call me. Feel free to email me. Look on our website. It has great information.
Right.
But just know what your rights are and be willing to stand up for them, because a lease is just a contract, and you are
Right.
an equal party to that contract. So know what you can and can't ask for.
Right. Which is always hard, right? Because
Yes.
we're talking about communication, and some people are either afraid to communicate or just don't communicate well enough. And for the landlords out there, if they feel like, I don't know, I know it tends to be more towards landlords to a certain extent, but if they're watching this video and they know that you're at Community Action Program, I guess what kind of services would you be able to provide for a landlord who might be calling and has an issue with maybe a tenant, whether it's, maybe they need assistance with rent or, referrals? What would you tell them?
So yeah, once again, it depends on the call and what they're asking for. So hopefully I can
Yeah.
answer whatever questions they may have.
Right.
And a lot of times it's just, they weren't sure, thought a law may have changed or a law may have changed and they weren't aware of it,
yes.
and just kind of want to know what's current timeline on something like that. Or they may be looking for rental assistance for their tenants as well, and I can point them out what there are for resources out there for that as well.
Absolutely. And now that legislation has started up, do you ever really follow if there's any laws that might be coming up for landlords and tenants? To
Yes.
see how that'll affect them. And if so, do you ever put those on your website?
I do personally follow them just because I think it's great to be aware of what potential for law changes are out there. Both state and local have several housing issues pending currently. But on our website, no, I don't put anything that is currently pending. That you go through the legislature to get that, and you can get alerts on that as well.
Oh, very good. Well, Roger, what else can you tell us about your office? I know that you've talked about case management, several different phone calls. And I think the one that I usually refer to you is when they have questions about their lease. And I think I started advocating when I do presentations on housing, advocating to people like, do not sign if you don't understand.
Absolutely.
Because I think that tends to come up all the time. The I didn't know. What was it on the lease? Yes, it was. And so leases, do you ever assist with people understanding their lease? Because I think a lot of times people really don't read their lease, or there's a language barrier.
Yes, the language barrier is a hard one, and that is,
Yeah.
when I do presentations, I make sure it's in writing if you need to take it with you to show somebody, so you know. But even when language isn't a barrier, it's sometimes 40 or pages or more document that they need to understand, and there's so much in it. And yet, sometimes I do look at people's leases. There's not a ton I can do other than saying, it does say this in your lease, and kind of as far as that scenario, what your lease says is kind of going to be the rule.
Okay.
If it's not violating another section of the Landlord-Tenant Act, leases are pretty strong. They're legal contracts, so, but hard to understand.
Absolutely. What has been the biggest challenge of your office?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is, but think about when I ask that question, it's more of it's something that usually comes up regularly. Like for example, in our office, our biggest challenge is the different dialects and languages that we receive, and making sure that people do understand the information that we have. So when I ask that, is really what is a challenge for your office? Is it the funding? Is it the lack of, I don't know.
I haven't had a funding problem that
Good.
I'm aware of yet.
Right.
But it's just trying to keep the information current. There's not a lot of changes in the law, but for me, trying to find the best ways to communicate that information, make sure it's getting out there as much as it can, because it is very important for people to know, and just what is the best way. You mentioned talking with people that English was a second language. I've taken to recently, sometimes I'm getting calls that don't speak the language, and I text back through Google Translate just to try to figure out what the initial question is and where they need to go. So yeah, it's challenges like that, things that come up every day that I'm like, how can I make that better so I can assist more people?
Absolutely. So I imagine that you also probably go out to several of the culture centers or different organizations and do your presentations on tenant rights and responsibilities.
Yes, I do. Lutheran Family Services, I go regularly with their immigrant groups, and LPS for their English as a second language family group. I forget what it's
Family literacy, I think you're referring to.
Yes, that is the one, yes. I do that for them occasionally. So yeah, as much as I can. If anybody needs a presentation, I'm available.
You know, and one of my last questions is Section 8, because that's a question that I get quite often is, you know, when people start complaining about their Section 8, which is Lincoln Housing Authority, I usually refer them back to, you need to talk to your caseworker. Do you ever find yourself on that end also where people are, because technically if it's a Section 8, they should be going back to their caseworker? Yes,
they definitely should, because I don't know Section 8 rules and regulations. That's all federal level stuff, whereas the questions I can answer are the state level things. But yeah, I do get those questions a lot. A lot of times it's involved with another issue, but I always make sure they're communicating with Lincoln Housing. So if they couldn't answer the question for you, at least they know what you're taking and what steps you're doing. So they make sure it doesn't interfere with their Section 8 voucher.
Absolutely. Well, I always have enjoyed, and you're probably one of the resources that I tend to refer to all the time, especially community members who are having the tenant issues or have questions. And it's not so much because I probably couldn't answer them, but I really don't know the Tenant Landlord Act thoroughly like I imagine you do. And so I think your office is one of the best resources we have in this community. And I think it's important for people to know what you do, which is a lot, because I know you're inundated probably every day with phone calls on issues that come up. Anything else that we should know about your office? I mean, it's pretty cut and dry, but it's important.
Pretty cut and dry, but everybody has a little different question, and it requires a different answer. A lot of them are very similar as far as where they go to and the resources I will share with them. But yeah, I enjoy the work. It keeps me busy.
Yeah, I know. I can imagine.
But yeah, I think it's very important, and that's why I try to get in, with as many, youth and student groups, and people are new, so I hopefully can answer the questions before they become problems.
Absolutely. That's a very good point, is making sure getting things said and done, or teaching in this case, the Tenant Landlord Act before they become a problem, because those are the difficult ones.
True. Very true.
Roger, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I know your information will be at the end. And if you have any questions, please do get a hold of him. I think, I know you do your best to try and get back to everyone when they call you and leave you a voicemail, and you're super busy, but thank you for taking the time being here today. Certainly, I appreciate it, and anybody can call. I'm do pretty good with my return call time. I try to get within 24 hours. So. Yeah, but yeah, there's good information on the website as well. So awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you today for just, listening and being a part of this conversation. If you have any questions, Roger Doerr's information will be at the end of this video. And remember, we all have rights.